Imagine waking up on a freezing January morning. You unplug your electric car and you realize that like 40% of your driving range has just vanished into thin air.
Yeah, literally right out the window.
Exactly. And for years, that has been the harsh reality of the lithium-ion battery. I mean, it's a brilliant piece of technology, but, it's incredibly temperamental.
Oh, absolutely. It's so fragile.
Right. But what if the cure to this billion-dollar engineering flaw and the secret to making EVs dirt cheap is sitting in a salt shaker in your kitchen right now?
It sounds almost too simple when you frame it like that. But the auto industry is currently undergoing a massive structural pivot toward that exact reality.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. We've spent the last 2 decades treating battery chemistry like a race to find the most exotic, rarest materials on the periodic table. And now the paradigm is finally shifting toward radical abundance.
Which makes this the perfect mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the quiet revolution happening under the hood of electric vehicles right now.
The shift to sodium.
Exactly. We're going to uncover how a shift away from incredibly rare lithium to abundant sodium, the exact same stuff found in table salt, could finally make electric vehicles affordable for absolutely everyone.
While simultaneously solving that cold weather range anxiety you mentioned, which just plagues drivers in northern climates.
Yeah. And to really grasp the scale of this shift, we are relying on two highly specific sources today.
Right. The first is a comprehensive technical breakdown from Sodium Battery Hub, published in March of 2026.
Which is packed with the raw physics.
It is, yeah. It explains exactly why sodium behaves so differently than lithium. And the second is a recently translated European automotive report.
Which details the rollout of a brand new 2026 Italian city car. So we get to see how this tech is actively hitting the streets.
Exactly. Real-world application.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get to the actual cars driving around Europe, we have to look at the massive geological bottleneck that forced the industry to rethink its reliance on lithium.
Yeah, the scarcity issue.
Right. For the past decade, lithium-ion has been the undisputed king of energy storage. It powers our phones, laptops, and, well, every major EV. But there is a glaring problem when you look at the natural abundance.
Oh, it's a huge problem. The global natural abundance of lithium in the Earth's crust and even in our oceans is shockingly low.
Like, how low are we talking?
We are looking at roughly 20 milligrams per liter.
20 milligrams. Wow. That is almost a rounding error in planetary terms.
It really is. And that scarcity means lithium is heavily concentrated in very specific geographical regions.
Which forces automakers to rely on incredibly fragile, politically complex mining and refinement chains, right?
Exactly. Every time a new gigafactory comes online, the demand for this highly constrained resource spikes, which inherently keeps the floor price of electric vehicles artificially high.
Right, so it's kind of like trying to cook everyday meals with rare white truffles. It's fantastic, but there just isn't enough of it.
That is a great analogy.
Thanks. And then you look at sodium, which is literally the sixth most common element on Earth. Going by that exact same metric, sodium sits at 2,360 milligrams per liter.
Yeah, so a massive, massive difference.
Over 100 times more abundant. It's like the difference between trying to collect rainwater in the desert versus, I don't know, turning on a high-pressure fire hose. So what does this all mean for the actual supply chain and the final price tag of a battery?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this abundance fundamentally rewrites the manufacturing economics from the ground up.
Because the materials are just cheaper.
That's part of it. But it isn't just about the raw cost of the material itself. The specific chemistry of a sodium-ion battery changes the entire architecture of how you build the cell.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so for example, in a traditional lithium-ion battery, manufacturers are forced to use copper for the negative current collector at the anode.
And copper is heavy and, subject to wild commodity price swings.
Exactly. It also requires extensive specialized refinement.
And the reason they are forced to use expensive copper instead of a cheaper metal is because of the atomic properties of lithium itself, right?
Spot on.
Because, from what the Sodium Battery Hub breakdown explains, lithium's atomic radius causes it to aggressively insert itself into cheaper metals.
Yes, the intercalation process.
Right, intercalation.
Yeah.
So if you try to use aluminum at the anode, the lithium basically merges with it, alloying with it, and completely degrades the structural integrity of the battery from the inside out.
That intercalation is a massive physical limitation for lithium. But sodium, is a physically larger atom.
So it behaves differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of its larger atomic radius, sodium simply cannot intercalate into aluminum. It physically bounces off.
Wow.
Yeah, so battery manufacturers can completely eliminate the heavy, expensive copper current collectors and replace them entirely with aluminum.
Which is significantly lighter and vastly cheaper. So if you are swapping copper for aluminum, and as the report notes, you're also dropping highly toxic organic solvents in favor of aqueous water-based electrolytes, you aren't just saving money on the raw materials.
Not at all.
You're completely bypassing the need for massive, highly specialized chemical refinement plants.
That deduction hits the nail on the head. You don't need the specialized safety gear, the toxic waste mitigation, or the heavy metallurgy that lithium and copper demand.
So manufacturers are no longer held hostage by global commodity spikes in rare earth metals.
Right. Once the manufacturing process is for sodium reach scale, the widespread availability of the materials ensures a completely stable, sustainable supply chain.
It turns battery production into a simple, scalable manufacturing process.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established that the floor price of a sodium battery is drastically lower, but that invariably brings us to the performance side of the equation, because cost savings mean absolutely nothing if the battery can't actually power a vehicle effectively.
Like the physics of it.
Yeah, and the Sodium Battery Hub source gets incredibly specific about this, particularly regarding safety and thermal runaway.
Safety is perhaps the most critical advantage, actually,
Oh.
and it's entirely dictated by the physical size of the sodium ion we just discussed.
The larger atomic radius.
Exactly. Because a sodium ion is physically bulkier than a lithium ion, it moves much more slowly between the anode and the cathode during the charging and discharging cycles.
Think of lithium ions like sports cars weaving recklessly through tight traffic. They move incredibly fast, but if they crash, say, due to a manufacturing defect or a severe car accident, the result is catastrophic.
Yes, thermal runaway.
Right. A rapid, terrifying chemical chain reaction that causes lithium-ion batteries to catch fire and burn with uncontrollable intensity.
That's a huge issue.
But sodium ions are like city buses. Because they are physically bulkier, they are forced to move slower and more predictably. So a catastrophic high-speed crash is virtually impossible.
That slower, predictable internal mobility drastically reduces the risk of the battery generating the rapid temperature spikes that trigger thermal runaway. The chemistry is just inherently stable.
Wait, if the sodium ions are larger and move more slowly, doesn't that mean the car is sluggish or takes forever to charge? I mean, if the chemicals are literally moving in slow motion, it sounds like you would be trapped at a highway charging station for hours.
It's a completely logical assumption, but it's actually one of the biggest misconceptions about sodium-ion technology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the slower internal mobility prevents dangerous localized heat buildup, but it doesn't throttle the overall charging architecture.
How so?
Because the sodium cell is so chemically stable and highly resistant to overheating, it can absorb massive amounts of ambient electricity without damaging the internal structure.
Oh, so because you don't have to worry about the battery bursting into flames from heat stress, the charging software can just blast it with raw power.
Precisely. You can push electrons into the system at a staggering rate. These sodium batteries are comfortably going from a 10% charge to an 80% charge in under 20 minutes at a standard fast charging station.
Wow, 20 minutes is nothing.
Right. The real trade-off, and any honest technical breakdown has to acknowledge the trade-off, is gravimetric energy density.
Gravimetric energy density being the actual weight penalty you pay for the power, like how much energy you can store per kilogram of battery mass.
Correct. The current industry leader, CATL, achieved 160 watt-hours per kilogram in their first generation of sodium cells.
Okay, that's not bad.
And by 2025, they unveiled their Naxtra passenger EV battery, which pushed that boundary to 175 watt-hours per kilogram.
Which is great progress, but how does that compare to lithium?
To put that in perspective, it's roughly on par with early lithium iron phosphate batteries, but it still lags behind the most advanced high-end lithium-ion cells.
Right, so you inevitably need a physically heavier sodium battery pack to achieve the exact same range as a lithium equivalent.
Yes. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you realize why taking a slight penalty on gravimetric energy density is an absolute bargain for everyday drivers.
Because of the charging and safety?
Exactly. You might lose a fraction of your theoretical maximum range, but in exchange, you gain lightning-fast charging times, and near total immunity to battery fires.
Which is huge.
And that brings us to the massive cold weather advantage.
Right, back to our frozen morning scenario. The Sodium Battery Hub report highlights that traditional lithium-ion batteries are notoriously fragile in sub-zero temperatures.
Very fragile. They regularly lose 30 to 40% of their operating efficiency the moment the temperature drops.
Which goes back to the electrolytes, right? Because the organic electrolytes required in lithium batteries become highly viscous in the cold.
They turn into a thick syrup.
Yeah, meaning the ions just struggle to swim through the medium to deliver power.
Exactly. But sodium-ion batteries utilize aqueous low-volatility electrolytes that simply do not thicken up when the temperature plummets.
Oh, this be working.
The resulting performance gap is staggering, honestly. The data shows that sodium-ion batteries maintain over 90% of their baseline performance even at minus 20 degrees Celsius.
Minus 20 Celsius. For context, that is minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Retaining 90% of your driving range at minus 4 degrees isn't just an incremental software update.
No, it's a game changer.
For a driver living in a cold climate, that fundamentally alters their relationship with the vehicle. You are no longer doing mental gymnastics, wondering if you have enough power left to get home from work after a sudden blizzard.
It transitions the electric vehicle from a fair-weather technology into a truly robust all-weather appliance. But of course, the science only matters if it actually escapes the laboratory.
Which means we need to talk about who is actually willing to buy a car with slightly lower energy density, but massive gains in safety, cost, and winter reliability.
And it turns out, European city commuters are leading that charge.
Yeah. Let's look at that European automotive report we translated, detailing a specific rollout happening in Italy right now in 2026. DR Automobiles, which is an Italian brand led by Massimo D'Aricio, is launching the new DR 1.0 EV.
The foundational context of this vehicle is critical, though, because DR Automobiles isn't building this from scratch.
Oh, right. They're using an existing platform.
Exactly. The DR 1.0 is heavily based on a highly successful Chinese platform called the Chery EQ1, which the industry affectionately refers to as the Little Ant.
Little Ant is the perfect moniker because this vehicle is incredibly compact. I mean, we are talking about a city car that measures roughly 3.20 meters in total length.
It's tiny.
It is essentially a heavily engineered, fully enclosed, street-legal technological cube, and inside this ultra-compact frame, DR is integrating these brand new CATL sodium cells.
And the timeline for this integration isn't speculative either.
Yep.
According to the translated report, the first demo units of this sodium-powered DR 1.0 are scheduled to arrive in Italian dealerships between June and September of 2026.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You look at the wider automotive market over the last few years, and we have seen a modern obsession with manufacturing 80,000 euro luxury electric SUVs.
Oh, absolutely. These massive, heavy vehicles.
Right. Vehicles that weigh 3 tons require huge resource-heavy lithium battery packs and are marketed to the public like high-performance spaceships.
Yeah.
And then you look at this tiny, purely practical Italian city car. It isn't trying to be a spaceship. It is just a highly efficient tool designed to get you across town.
That contrast highlights exactly why DR Automobiles chose this specific microcar platform to debut sodium technology.
Because of the size.
Exactly. A 3.2-meter city car does not require a massive battery pack, so the slightly lower gravimetric energy density of sodium we analyzed earlier becomes entirely negligible in a vehicle of this footprint.
That makes total sense. The range listed for the DR 1.0 EV is roughly 210 to 230 kilometers on the WLTP cycle, which, for you listening, is the standard European testing metric that gives us a pretty realistic look at everyday mixed-use driving range.
Yeah, that's about 130 to 140 miles per charge.
Which is plenty for a lot of people.
This raises an important question. Do we actually need every single electric car rolling off an assembly line to have a 500-kilometer range?
Probably not.
Right. The automotive industry has spent billions trying to cure range anxiety by stuffing increasingly massive, expensive lithium batteries into vehicles to force them to travel 400 miles on a single charge.
Which is overkill for most days.
Exactly. If you were an urban commuter navigating tight European city streets, or simply doing a grocery run in a crowded suburb, lugging around a 100-kilowatt-hour battery is incredibly inefficient.
Because the daily commute for the vast majority of drivers is just a tiny fraction of that distance.
Precisely.
Carrying around thousands of pounds of rare earth metals just in case you decide to drive across the country once a year is a terrible misallocation of resources.
For that urban commuter, a rock-solid, reliable 210 kilometers of range, paired with a battery architecture that cannot suffer thermal runaway and refuses to degrade in winter chills, is the absolute perfect recipe.
It's everything they actually need.
It really is. It represents a strategy of pure democratization. Automakers are finally bringing the electric vehicle down from the luxury pedestal and turning it into an accessible mass-market tool.
And the most important metric for any mass market tool is the price tag.
Always.
The European report clearly states they are aiming to price the DR 1.0 EV below the 18,000 to 19,000 euro mark.
That is incredibly aggressive pricing.
It is. That positions it as one of the absolute cheapest electric vehicles available in Italy, directly competing with legacy budget EVs like the Dacia Spring.
A brand new electric car, priced under 19,000 euros, equipped with a battery that laps at sub-zero temperatures and charges from 10 to 80% in 20 minutes.
It's unheard of.
That specific intersection of price and reliability is where true societal mass adoption occurs. You do not transition an entire global economy to electric transport by selling a few thousand luxury SUVs to high-income earners.
Right, you achieve it by selling millions of affordable, bulletproof city cars to everyday people.
Exactly.
It is a complete reframing of what a car is supposed to be, moving away from a status symbol and toward true utility. And that brings us full circle to what we want you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive today.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. We set out on a mission to see how a shift away from scarce lithium to abundant sodium could finally make EVs genuinely affordable. And what we uncovered in these sources isn't just a clever manufacturing discount.
No, it's so much more than that.
We are looking at a glimpse into a very near future where buying an EV is no longer a massive financial burden or an exercise in winter range anxiety.
The technology shifts the vehicle from a fragile piece of high-tech electronics into a highly practical, incredibly resilient reality.
It becomes an everyday appliance, one that doesn't rely on bottlenecked global supply chains or politically volatile mining operations, but instead utilizes the sixth most abundant element on the planet.
A vehicle that won't leave you stranded when the ambient temperature drops below zero.
And crucially, won't require a second mortgage to afford in the first place.
The transition from lithium to sodium really is the ultimate triumph of the ordinary over the exotic.
It absolutely is. And we want to explicitly and warmly thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us, for engaging with these complex topics, and for bringing your curiosity to this deep dive.
Our goal is always to describe these massive technological shifts with clarity and in a way that is genuinely engaging.
And it is a thrill to explore them alongside you.
Tracing the journey from the microscopic physics of atomic intercalation to the macroeconomics of the European automotive market has been a fantastic exercise today.
But before we officially sign off, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder a little something to explore on your own that builds entirely on the data we just covered.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If sodium batteries are truly making cars this much cheaper to produce, incredibly safe, and highly resistant to elemental degradation, are we heading toward a future where we start treating our vehicles more like disposable household appliances?
Wow. Think about it.
Right. If the battery pack is no longer a precious, fragile $20,000 component, but rather a cheap, robust block of salt-based chemistry, how will that structurally alter the way we view car ownership?
Are we moving away from vehicles being massive long-term financial investments?
And towards cars that are simply swapped out or recycled like a kitchen microwave when they eventually wear down? How will a cheap, salt-powered battery completely upend the economics of the used car market in 5 years?
That paradigm shift extends far beyond what physically powers the motor. It challenges the very concept of automotive equity.
It really does. It turns out the most revolutionary material of the decade wasn't some rare unobtainium mine from the bottom of the ocean. It was the salt sitting right there on your kitchen table all along. Thanks for listening.